least harmful footprint, if you will, to try to do it as responsibly as possible. So a lot of our panelists today have really interesting stories to tell about how to develop energy sustainably. And I look forward to hearing from all of them today, as well as from all of you, and hearing your questions and comments. So just a little bit about the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation for people that might not be familiar with it. It's a charitable foundation based in Austin. It was created about a little over 20 years ago by Cynthia and George Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell has deep roots, or had deep roots in the oil and gas industry, and was kind of known as the father of fracking. He was the petroleum engineer who figured out how to combine the technologies of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing to be able to produce from very tight shale formations. So he started working in the Barnett Shale, but of course the technology has been adopted, all over, all over the world at this point in shale formations. But Mr. Mitchell and Mrs. Mitchell were very committed to sustainability, and their foundation was founded around the notion of sustainable development. And the funding that the foundation provides is for sustainable development, with the idea that we can, strike a balance between economic development of all sorts, including energy and sustainability. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first keynote speaker of the day, who I'm delighted to welcome here. Mayor Patrick Payton is joining us. He is the mayor of Midland, has been the mayor since 2019. Wonderful leader of Midland, has really put Midland's always been an important part of our state, but has put it on the map nationally as an important and up-and-coming city. Mayor Payton was the founding and senior pastor of Stonegate Fellowship, which is a multi-site congregation here in Midland with over 5,000 congregants, very large congregation. He retired from that work in 2018, but has been involved since then with the Payton Group, which he founded, which focuses on leadership, coaching, and performance, organizational performance, as well as individual performance. He's been very active as a leader here in Midland, as I said, with mayors around the country, but also with national and international leaders, members of Congress, the president, international leaders, and is focused on things like nuclear nonproliferation, religious freedom, human rights. We're delighted to have Mayor Payton here with us today, so please join me in welcoming him.
Well, good morning. It's good to be here with you. I was thinking about the speaking opportunities I have this week, and I think I drew the short straw. Today I'm beginning the day with you at 8:30. You're probably barely awake. There's not enough coffee in your system yet, and so everybody's like, great, the mayor's the first speaker we're going to hear. I leave for Dallas as soon as I get finished here, and then I have the speaking slot in the evening at 4 o'clock after a day of meetings right before happy hour. So I have not chosen the good speaking slots. Thank you for that introduction. I also just returned from Washington, D.C. If I sound like I'm stopped up, they have these trees called cherry blossoms up there that apparently have all exploded in the last week. And I felt great right until I landed in Washington, D.C. And it wasn't because of the politics, it was because of the cherry blossoms. And so, but all of you are familiar with how this works now. You walk into someone's office, and if you cough or you sneeze or you have to blow your nose, what's the next thing you have to say to somebody? I don't have COVID. It's okay. I tested. I even carried a negative COVID test in my pocket the whole time I was in Washington, D.C. And another little tidbit from Washington, D.C., I think Richard was with us. Richard, where are you at? I just saw you late hand. Richard was with me. I don't know how many of you have been to D.C., not on vacation, but to go visit the halls of Congress. And you're trying to visit with your representatives and with your senators. And I've been there multiple times, but had a few people with me who had never been. And we'd been, I don't know, maybe about 5 meetings one afternoon, and as we walked out into the hallways of Congress, this one gentleman who was with me, he said, I didn't realize the country was being run by 25-year-olds. And I said, you're exactly right. If you've never been and you wonder what I mean, you never meet with a congressman or a senator. You always meet with their staffers, who are all maybe 25. I'm getting to the point where everybody looks like they're 18. I don't know if you've ever gotten to that point, or if you've gotten to that point. And they're all supposed to be the liaison for energy and for world peace and everything else. And then I asked every one of them in all the offices we were in, I said, now are you from Texas? And none of them are from the state where they serve the senator or the congressman. So not only is our country defended by 25-year-olds, it's run by 25-year-olds, and I'll leave it at that for your political good. I really just want to give you some opening remarks about a topic that has become very real to me since I took office and was sworn in January of 2020. When I was sworn in January of 2020, if you can remember that far back, it seems like about 10 years ago the way our lives have been. But when I was sworn in, Midland was a completely different place. Odessa was a different place. The Permian Basin was a different place. I don't think it's much of an extreme to say the world was a different place. And I remember in mid to late February, sitting in the basement of City Hall, we had an emergency meeting, and we were having some conversations about this thing called COVID, and we were hearing reports from China. That's really about it. Until we started getting phone calls, and it was that afternoon in the basement of City Hall, when we started getting phone calls from friends and family members who were all in the military. And they were telling us things like this. And this is when nobody knew anything. The country's about to get shut down. One phone call we got was, it said, President Trump is about to mobilize all the military and they're going to shut down the economy throughout the entire United States. It was so surreal to me that I took my cell phone, and I have it here with me because I want to refer to an article here in just a minute. So I went out to the hallway and I called all three of my grown children. I called my wife first, and this is the message. I said, you might want to go to the store and just get some bottled water and maybe a few groceries. Didn't know toilet paper was the commodity of choice at this particular time, so weren't aware of that yet. And then we just watched things begin to unravel. And since that time, for the last 2 years, the one thing that I have grown actually just convinced of is the absence of what I would call the radical middle that's going to be necessary for our future success. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean by that. The very first meeting I had after COVID broke out was with doctors and surgeons. I guess that's the same thing, a doctor and a surgeon. And they all came to my office, and we sat around the conference table. Everybody's in a you remember your mindset back then. You were probably in the mindset of, this is stupid, I can't understand this, or I'm scared to death. There was rarely anything in between that. And I sat down across the table with these doctors, and several of them are weeping. And we're about early March now, and they start talking about their friends who are in New York and New Jersey and other places of the world and the things that are happening with COVID. This was the one quote that never left my mind because of how extreme it was. The quote was, Mr. Mayor, if you don't shut this city down, you will have 2,000 dead people on your hands in 2 months. All seriousness, no halfway measure on this. And so I'm sitting in a conference room. I was supposed to have been elected mayor of this city that was going to be, doing amazing things with oil and gas. And here we go. The sky's the limit. It's all peace, love, and rainbows. And now I have a group of doctors sitting in front of me saying, if you don't shut the city down, you might as well. In fact, she added to the comment. She said, you might as well go buy refrigerated trucks because you're going to need that many for the dead bodies. Okay, that's a good start to your career as a politician. The next meeting was with another group of people who came into my office, and they said, and by the way, if you think I'm exaggerating because I've been a preacher and a politician, I haven't sold insurance yet, and I'm not a landman, so there's no exaggeration here. So I sit down with the next group of people, and this is what they say. Mr. Mayor, if you shut this city down, you're nothing short of a communist or a socialist, and all you're trying to do is grab power. And everybody on both sides is as sincere as they could possibly be, but maybe not as aware as they should have been, or maybe not as curious as they could have been. So I remember I had a few friends who were doctors who I could sit down with who began to show me a radical middle. I had a few other people who would sit down with me that were in the industry or in business or restaurant owners who showed me concern and a bit of a radical middle as well. And I remember not long after that, I was writing some notes in my journal, and I said, I think I'm learning what it means to be the fulcrum to the teeter-totter of extremes. Because I cannot go down one side or the other without damage to all people. But maybe I can get in the middle and we can find a way to moderate this discussion. I wouldn't be standing here today telling you, we did it all perfect. We did it correctly here in Midland. This is a different place than a place like New York or a place like Los Angeles or London or something like that. But we had to navigate our course. But this issue of how you navigate in the extremes, I believe, is more relevant and real in today's world than it has ever been. One of my first conversations I had with a reporter when I was elected mayor, we were sitting down, and I won't tell you where this reporter is from. You would know it if I told you. At this particular time, I'd been asked to be on CNN. I'd been asked to be on the BBC worldwide. I'd been asked to be on Fox News. I was on the Canadian Broadcasting Network in a radio show, and all of us were having conversations about energy, about what was happening in the Permian Basin. And one of the questions that was asked of me was this young reporter, and if you've ever dealt with reporters in the Permian Basin, most of them as well, remember I told you the world's being run by 25-year-olds, most of them are just out of college, in the basin especially. And they're really looking for their Woodward moment, if you know what I mean by that. They're kind of looking for their hot story that's going to propel them to Dallas or Fort Worth or some other area where they can be in the media. So we have a conversation. Apparently this young person had learned in journalism school to have a really friendly conversation with the person you're interviewing and then try to hit them with the zinger at the very end. And so we were having a very friendly conversation, and I'm waiting for the zinger. And at the very end, he says, my final question, and here it comes. I'm ready for it. He said, my final question is, how do you feel about being the mayor of the place that's probably single-handedly most responsible for destroying the climate, the world, and the environment? And I said, well, I love it. I didn't say that. I just stepped back for a minute and I said, is that where we're going to start the assumptions? I said, do you want to have a conversation about that? And I sort of shot back at him a little bit, and he had one of these microphones in front of me, if you've seen these before, that kind of have the fuzzy thing on them, and they keep the wind from blowing in and all that. And so I just looked at him and I said, sir, I wanted to say son. You know how when you get older, and you're like, son, let me tell you something, which means you're really disrespecting him. I said, sir, do you have any idea what kind of materials were used to produce the plastics that go into this little fuzzy thing? He said, no. I said, it's a byproduct of the oil and gas industry. I said, do you have a Tesla downstairs? He was like, no, I wish I did. And I said, do you know to produce the electricity, it doesn't just come out of the wall. It's probably from natural gas or something like that. And I said, if you're going to ask me a question like that, this is when I said, this time I did say, son, if you're going to ask me a question like that, then at least be willing to have a conversation about that. And then when I was in Washington, D.C., I had someone walk up to me and say this. So, can you tell me why the Permian Basin hates polar bears? I'm not, again, preacher, politician, I get it, but I'm still not lying yet. And I said, is that where we're starting the conversation? With polar bears? He said, absolutely. Because the people you represent, the industry you represent, what happens in your area of the world destroys polar bears. And I said, well, the answer to that question is twofold. One, they make great rugs. And so I just had to find a way to get him to jump back a little bit. And I said, two, you don't even know what you're talking about. And so finally, I'm on, do y'all remember this will be the old people question. Do you remember on PBS a show called the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour? Anybody remember that? Okay, like 6 of you. Now it's just called the NewsHour. So I'm invited to be on PBS on the NewsHour. And there's another mayor from another region of the country, and we're supposed to have a debate about energy. And so when I get on the television and we start having this debate, I open the discussion with this phrase. I said, the people in the Permian Basin, probably more than any other place in the region, understand the great outdoors and love the great outdoors. And I said, we probably understand energy more than anybody else that's even watching this show. Because you can drive far and wide around here and you see what we're having to do to work with wind and with solar, and you see the industry beginning to wake up to the things that they're going to have to do, not just to have sustainability in their profits, but to have sustainability and protection of our environment. I said, we are committed to a full-on conversation rather than a fight. When I left, I have a city phone and a personal phone, and my city phone, because you can get my email just on the website, started blowing up. And I was getting emails from all over the country, literally all over the world. And here's how nearly all of them started. I probably disagree with you on your politics. But then they followed up with this statement. But thank you for displaying a willingness to just have a conversation. And the fact of the matter is, one of my favorite books of all time is a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Maybe some of you have read it, you have it on your shelf. It's one of my favorites. A lot of people have it, they've read it once, but they've rarely worked the book. The 5th habit in Stephen Covey's work says, seek first to understand before demanding to be understood. And I actually think we're at if I can go back to what I said at the beginning, I believe we're actually at a fulcrum moment in our discussion where we can seek first to understand each other's position. It's not about whether you're for alternative fuels or whether you're a fossil fuels person. It's really whether or not you're into human thriving. It's really whether you are into environmental thriving. It's really whether you're going to seek to understand what's happening on the other side of the globe as well as what's happening in the Permian Basin or Central Texas or Pennsylvania or North Dakota. You know as well as I do, which is probably why you do exactly what I do. I no longer worry about watching the news on television. I no longer worry about paying attention to Twitter or Facebook, because we live in a day and age where people are allowed to give their hardened opinions not based on any solid facts, but for their hardened opinions to be equated to solid facts. And you can't have a conversation. I'll give you a goofy example that just kind of ran into my mind. I love dogs. I don't know how many of you guys love dogs. You're like, where's this going? I'll just tell you what I mean. I love dogs. I love them. But when I was running for office, I had a consultant who was kind of helping me get through some certain things. And he said, I need to tell you, you need to really be aware that probably the group in your campaign that's going to cause you the most heartache are the dog lovers and the cat lovers. And I said, are you kidding me? You cannot be serious about this. I've been in office a little over 2 years. And the people that, no pun, all pun intended, hound me the most are the dog and cat people. And they have an opinion about how we're supposed to do this. And it's everything I can do to not say, really? Is this really the biggest issue? But the fact of the matter is, people all around us are filled with information, but not willing to study the facts. And it's people like you in a gathering like this, who even the uniqueness of your title related to land and energy are the people that need to be having these conversations. They need to be willing to sit down across the table from people who we think disagree with us and have a conversation. My conviction, and it's the way I'm having to lead now, and it's the very way I had to have conversations in Washington, D.C. yesterday, was I think it's time for a real fight for the radical middle. There's no more room, or actually there should be no more room on the radical right or the radical left. And if you think this is something new in our culture, let me tell you one more story. I was reading a biography of Dwight Eisenhower, and this was one of his original writings where he was working on his memoirs. And in this writing, he's discussing being asked to run for president. He didn't want to, but he was being asked to by a number of people. And I'm reading the book, and I remember just stopping when I read this, and this is what he said. What concerns me the most, now think about when this was, a long time ago, okay, 50s. He says, what concerns me the most is the radical left and the reactive right, and how if we lose the middle, we'll lose our country. Now, people on the right and the left will call a person like me who says if you lose the middle, you lose your country, a sellout, a compromiser. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't start having conversations in the middle, we'll not only lose our country, our state, but we'll lose our lands. We'll lose our energy until we find a way to get past these extremes. It is a conviction that has been hugely, that was like a Donald Trump word, hugely. It's a conviction that has just embedded itself in me. And I'll tell you one last story of how I think there's some hope. And it's on the energy front. I don't have COVID. Yesterday, I was on a phone call with Representative Levin from California. I don't know if you've heard of Representative Levin. He was one of the first signers of the Green New Deal. And so I had to pull over on the highway because I had to take a Zoom call. And we get on the call, and guess who we're not speaking to? Representative Levin. We're speaking with Oliver, his legislative assistant, who is maybe 25. And just so you know, the first part of the story was true. I told you about 10 minutes ago. Oliver was from New Jersey, working for the congressman in California, okay? And so I already know what conversation we're going into. And so when we started the conversation, I said to Oliver, I said, what I really want to do is see how we can have a conversation in light of world events and in light of the importance of the oil and gas industry responsibly producing for the globe. And I said, and I also want to see if we can have a conversation about how, if the United States is going to depend on Iran, OPEC, Venezuela, or other places to produce oil and gas, perhaps you would give us an opportunity to have a fuller discussion about how we produce a barrel of oil 75% cleaner than anywhere else in the world. And then I said, I don't know what's going to happen by 2050 when everybody has their climate goals. I said, it's easy to set a goal for 2050 when most everybody who's talking about goals in 2050 will be dead, and when we've seen the world changed in 2 short years. But I said, could we at least have a conversation about what you've called the bridge fuel of natural gas? And by the end of the conversation, after I sort of started talking about what was happening in the basin and how there's no such thing as a spigot we can just turn on and off to make oil flow around here, this was the end of the conversation. Well, thank you all for this. Appreciate it very much. Look forward to talking to you another time. Conversation over. And that's what I ran into up and down the halls of Congress, was people have a narrative, but they don't have their facts, and they're not willing to have a conversation. My hope for you and my hope for us is that every chance we get to speak, and I was going to reference this article that was in Bloomberg. I'm not sure if you saw it, in March 24th. Here was the title of the article. Why the global oil market hinges on 5 U.S. counties, and the main ones were Martin County and Midland County and Lee County. If we get the chance, whether it's oil and gas or whether it's lands and conservation, my encouragement to you is to fight for the radical middle. Because the people on both sides, it's like losing your hearing on one side or the other. If you lose your hearing on one side or the other, things are off. Or even your equilibrium is off. And if we don't fight for the radical middle, then the equilibrium for our city, our state, and our nation will be off. And we'll not make the progress we can make. I really don't give a rat's you-know-what, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. What I care about is human thriving and community thriving. And it's people like you, it's people like us combined, who have to fight for the radical middle for the future of your lands, of our energy, and of our hope. Thanks for your time. I hope you have a great day. I apologize for having to leave. I'm going to go to the center of the state and see if I can ruin my sinuses even more. But God bless you, and just have a great time. Thank you very much.